It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
So the Office of Fair Trading in New South Wales, they would like a high-profile scalp, because once you start coming out and saying, look, these are significant penalties for breaking the law in this way, then they're hoping that there'll be a bit of a trickle-down, I guess, effect with the rest of the market to start taking these laws seriously.
And that is Veronica Morgan as we launch into another episode with more property information right around Australia 7 days a week. And I hope that it has been another productive one for you. Friday, again, the weekend almost here. It is May the 9th. We are nearly 1 week, aren't we, post-federal election. The Trump effect, many said that helped Albo and his party win so convincingly. And on a Friday, let's take you right now to Sydney, catch up with Veronica Morgan from Good Deeds. And good morning, Veronica. Welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast. How glad are you, 1 week on from the federal election?
Good morning. Yeah, it was a pretty amazing election to watch. I was glued to the ABC. Anthony Green is well known to be an amazing election analyst, and he's retiring. So I had to watch, and I could not believe it. Watching it unfold in front of my very eyes was quite an incredible outcome.
Yes, indeed. And of course, there's been all this talk, people have just been waiting for the elections to get behind us before they buy. But personally, I think if you're transacting no matter what.
Yeah, look, I mean, I actually think that that's talked up more than I actually see on the ground, that's for sure. And in fact, if you think about this particular election on May the 3rd, the weekend before that was the Anzac Day weekend, before that was Easter, and then across that whole sort of 2.5 weeks, there's been school holidays. So there's been lots of other reasons that people might sit on their hands in terms of bringing their property to market or even going to open inspections and auctions, etc. So I would say the election's the least of the causes of that. Now, will be interesting to see how the market responds now. I don't think the election really will have anything to do with it. What's going to be more interesting will be when the RBA meets on May the 20th, and we'll see what happens with interest rates.
Indeed, yes, that is fast approaching. Right, now let's segue here and look at some mortgage brokers who are becoming, I understand, buyers' agents. Probably the first thing is this a conflict of interest in any way?
There appears to be a bit of a trend in some circles of mortgage broking, and there's some new courses that have been released that are targeting mortgage brokers and teaching them how to become a buyer's agent. And to be honest, I think, yes, it is a huge conflict of interest. And even when you're reading the marketing guff around these courses, they refer to things such as increase revenue and save you from losing revenue, i.e. they're seeing it as a bit of a money grab. But you've got to understand where brokers get their money from. They get their money from selling money, right? They sell money and banks give them a commission for doing so. So if they can help you buy more money from those banks, they're going to be making more money. And so you can just see how there could be definitely a conflict of interest here.
Well, that's going to be an interesting one to watch for sure. Buyers agents, of course, they're skilled negotiators trained to secure the best purchase price and terms. Mortgage brokers typically lack that experience. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say, but I guess what I would add a bit of nuance there, because sadly there is a low barrier to entry for buyer's agents, and one of the things they're not taught prior to becoming licensed is negotiation skills. So you can't assume that a buyer's agent is a good negotiator. So if anybody's thinking about using a buyer's agent, you really do need to work out, is the person you're going to engage good at negotiating? But that said, a buyer's agent at least has to negotiate their own fees, whereas mortgage brokers don't have to. They don't even have to sell a product or a service at a price. If you think about it, they're offering a free service effectively. And so, that's a skill that really is not inbuilt into what they do on a day-to-day basis anyway, negotiating. And the other thing too is that how do they work out the price to pay? Well, I can tell you, and in my buyer's agency business, we see it quite often where a client is being given what's called an AVM or a pricing report from the broker. So the AVM is an automated valuation model. They press a button on CoreLogic and they hand this over to the client as if to say, well, that will tell you what to pay for the property. Well, more than 9 times out of 10, these are way off beam. A lot of times they're way under, in which case the client's never going to buy because they're just not going to be in the ballpark. And we also often see that these price estimates come in a lot higher than market value. So without those skills at being able to do the proper pricing research to assess market value and guide a client as to what's the right price for them to pay, they just run the risk of, I guess, creating havoc out there.
Some people might say that mortgage brokers might not have in-depth knowledge of specific suburbs, although I do know some mortgage brokers that have got really good self-awareness when it does come to that. What about market cycles? Does a mortgage broker have as much as potentially what a buyer's agent does? And then you can have a look at the adequate property valuation skills that you're talking about also.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, even when you're looking at using a buyer's agent, I encourage people to think about, engaging somebody who themselves has got 10 years experience, or they're working very closely within a team, where they've got mentoring and advisory within that team that has got at least 10 years experience. And the reason for that is because there are hot markets and cold markets, and properties will perform differently in different markets. Some properties in a hot market, for example, every property gets competitive, but in a slow market, you really do see very clearly what's an A-grade property and still gets competitive interest from buyers versus a B or C-grade property, which can struggle to sell. And so if they haven't actually had that exposure to those ups and down cycles, they're not going to know the difference. And as it comes to brokers, brokers don't necessarily have to, they're legislated nationally for starters, so they're regulated nationally, whereas buyer's agents are regulated on a state or territory basis because the legislation is different. So there's a whole different sort of operating system, if you like. But also, if you don't recognise the types of properties that can perform better over time versus others that don't, it requires critical thinking. Now, I do know some brokers who've been around a long time and do understand that concept. Certainly my co-host on the Elephant in the Room podcast, for example, Chris Bates, he's one of those. He gets that. But, a lot of other brokers I talk to, that they don't even recognise that. They don't actually track or benchmark performance of properties, and it's never sort of, the light bulb's never gone on for them.
Yeah, the light bulb is lacking perhaps. And in terms of the buyer's agency market, like if we look at Sydney, what's sort of been happening for 2025, like in terms of new buyer's agents, new companies coming into town? How much growth have you seen?
There is increasing competition, that's for sure. And it is interesting because there is a low barrier to entry, and there are shortcuts that people who want to get into the market quickly have been using to get a license in other states and then apply for mutual recognition and bypass all the experience and all the rest of it that they need in order to qualify under New South Wales regulations. So it is sadly a market where a lot of inexperience can be allowed to, be out there trading with people and actually setting up business. And you've got to think about it. If you go do the back door, do the shortcut to get your license, you've never worked for anybody else, you're only sort of based on your own observations, which may or may not be good observations. And I would hazard they won't be good observations because I've been now doing it 25 years. And I can honestly tell you, even coming out of a sales background, my beliefs on what makes a good property, they needed a lot of work, and that's been through experience. So if these small players are not getting mentored, they're not working for established buyers agents with those 10 years experience, then where are they getting the feedback to work out whether they're doing a good job or not? So it's quite a scary space from a consumer's point of view because people don't know how to judge a good one from a bad one. There's a lot of really good marketing out there. A lot of people talk the talk. The market is being filled with people who really have very little experience, and that's scary for consumers, and our regulators don't seem to recognise the danger.
Yes, now talking of regulators, I want to change tack here. A top-performing real estate office in Sydney is currently under investigation by New South Wales Fair Trading Act following a compliance crackdown on underquoting. Now, the agency, which has gained attention for its high-volume sales and industry recognition, is being scrutinised by the Strata and Property Services Task Force. Underquoting is a serious offence in New South Wales with significant fines in place for breaches, although I guess it can be argued whether those fines are significant.
Yeah, well, Underquoting has been against the law for a number of years. In fact, back to 2016 is the last change to the laws. It's illegal in many states and territories across the country. Victoria in particular has had some very high profile cases where they have had issued fines in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think from memory, there was one as high as $750,000. In fact, I did interview the fellow that got that fine some years back on the Elephant in the Room podcast. So the Office of Fair Trading in New South Wales, they would like a high profile scalp, because once you start coming out and saying, look, these are significant penalties for breaking the law in this way, then they're hoping that there'll be a bit of a trickle down, I guess, effect with the rest of the market to start taking these laws seriously. The actual fine, the maximum fine if it goes to court in New South Wales currently for underquoting is only $22,000. And I tell you what, if you're raking in millions of dollars in commissions every year, that's just that's chump change. That's just a cost of doing business. It'll be interesting because in Victoria, they use the ACCC. They use consumer protection legislation, not the actual fair trading legislation or consumer affairs legislation. So I wonder whether that's going to be a similar thing here in New South Wales. And I think too that the Office of Fair Trading wouldn't necessarily go public with this investigation unless they're sure they've got a case. So it will be interesting to see this unfold and whether or not they will enact that different legislation in order to be able to impose larger fines.
Yeah, because as you say, the underquoting of real estate has been illegal in New South Wales since 2016, and these changes, they were aimed at stopping agents from misleading buyers about property price expectations. It's a bit of a grey area, this one. And just sort of circling back to the fines, for 2023 financial year and 2024, there were 379 inspections carried out, uncovering 148 breaches. Now, how much did that sort of rake in? Well, because of the fine threshold, they issued over $143,000. So part of the problem might be that they, as well as, if you're right, if they're going after a scalp, they might have to increase the penalty here.
Well, and that's got to be legislated, which is, that's part of their problems. But also those fines, on the spot fines, are I think they're $2,200 from memory. They're a small amount. So the $22,000 maximum fine, that's only if it goes to court and the OFT wins. So, it's a lot easier to just slap a fine without needing to put together all the resources to go to court. I definitely know that $2,200 fine is definitely seen as a cost of doing business with many agents. Anecdotally, I've heard that being said and many, many times over the years. And so it's just a slap on the wrist. I don't really care too much. It is a complicated issue, though, because the legislation is very clear in its instruction, but there are interpretations, shall we say. And I tell you what, that agents do love to look for interpretations so they can get around it. But the issue is you've got a conflict here. In some markets, if you don't underquote, you are not actually fulfilling your fiduciary obligation to your vendor to get the best possible price. And that is because other agents are underquoting. So it's a very difficult and sticky position for agents to be in. But I think this is why the Office of Fair Trading would want to go for a leading agent, because they be the ones who be setting the tone in a marketplace. If you're just a smaller boutique agent and you want to do the right thing, you have good ethics and you really want to be trusted and you come at it from a position of fairness and honesty and all that sort of stuff, you're disadvantaged because vendors are inclined to go with agents that sort of get the results. And in order to get the results, we'll take properties to market and underquote.
Yeah.
It's a complicated one.
Well, thanks for coming back on to the Real Estate Breakfast. As always, pleasure to have you on.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Craig.
Every morning from 6 a.m, we bring you the latest real estate news with diverse perspectives from leading industry experts. We deliver the most property podcasts across Australia every week. We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.